The flames licked at Elizabeth Jameson's skirts as she backed deeper into the barn, the crackling inferno closing in from all sides. It was 1879 in Cimarron, New Mexico, and what had begun as an ordinary evening tending to her father's horses had turned into a desperate fight for survival. The smoke choked her lungs and stung her eyes as she clutched the necklace her mother had left her, the only piece of her family's legacy she'd managed to grab when the fire erupted from a knocked-over lantern. Elizabeth had come west from Boston just 3 months prior, following her father's dream of raising horses in the untamed territory. At 22, she had reluctantly left behind the comforts of city life for this rugged existence. Now, trapped among frightened animals and blazing hay bales, she feared she might never see another dawn. "Help!" she screamed, her voice barely audible above the roaring flames. Her long auburn hair had come loose from its pins, and she pressed herself against the back wall, knowing there was nowhere left to go. The heat was unbearable, sweat streaming down her face, mingling with tears of terror. Outside, the night was alive with commotion as the townspeople formed a bucket line from the well to the burning structure. Among them was Kieran Abernathy, a rugged cowboy who had only recently taken work at the neighboring ranch. At 30, he had spent most of his adult life drifting through the Western Territories, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "There's someone inside," shouted the blacksmith, pointing toward the barn as a scream pierced the night. Without hesitation, Kieran threw down his hat and pulled his bandana up over his mouth and nose. "Which way?" he demanded, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "Back corner where the tack room is," someone yelled. Kieran didn't wait another second. He charged toward the burning structure, ignoring the shouts behind him warning of the danger. The heat hit him like a wall as he approached the main doors, which were already engulfed. Spotting a smaller side entrance, he raced toward it, kicked it open, and plunged into the inferno. Inside, the smoke was so thick he could barely see, and the roar of the fire deafening. Embers rained down from the hayloft above, and support beams groaned ominously. Dropping to his knees where the air was clearer, he crawled forward, squinting through the haze. "Hello, is anyone in here?" He shouted, his voice rough from the smoke. Elizabeth heard the voice through her coughing fit and summoned what little strength remained. "Here, I'm here." Following the sound, Kieran made his way deeper into the barn. The horses had already fled through open stalls, but flames blocked the same path for any human. When he finally spotted her, pressed against the far wall, her face smudged with soot and her eyes wide with fear, something stirred in his chest that had nothing to do with the smoke. "I've got you," he said, reaching her side and taking in her condition with a quick glance. "Can you walk?" Elizabeth nodded, though her legs felt weak with relief and terror. "I think so." "Stay low," Kieran instructed, taking her hand. "The way I came in is blocked now. We need to find another exit." Together, they crawled along the edge of the barn, the heat intensifying with each passing second. A beam crashed down just feet away, sending up a shower of sparks that singed Elizabeth's skirts. She cried out, and Kieran immediately moved to shield her with his body. "There," he said, pointing to a small window that led to the outside. "It's going to be tight, but I think you can fit through." They reached the window, and Kieran smashed out the remaining glass with his elbow. "Ladies first," he said, trying to sound calmer than he felt as he laced his fingers together to boost her up. Elizabeth hesitated. "What about you? I'll be right behind you. Now go." With his help, she scrambled through the opening, tumbling onto the dirt outside. Kieran was larger and had more difficulty, but with a final push and Elizabeth pulling his arms from outside, he squeezed through just as another section of the roof collapsed behind him. They fell together onto the ground, gasping for the sweet night air, their bodies trembling with exertion and relief. Kieran instinctively wrapped an arm around Elizabeth, protecting her still as townspeople rushed to their aid. "You saved my life," Elizabeth whispered, looking up at the stranger whose face was streaked with soot, his dark hair damp with sweat. "Anyone would have done the same," Kieran replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have risked death to save a woman they'd never met. As they were led away from the burning barn to be tended by the doctor's wife, neither realized that this moment of terror would be the beginning of something. Neither had been looking for something that would change both their lives forever. Dr. Morrison insisted on examining both Elizabeth and Kieran for burns and smoke inhalation. While the doctor's wife, Martha, brought them water and clean cloths to wipe the soot from their faces, Elizabeth couldn't stop staring at her rescuer. "You're new to Cimarron, aren't you?" she asked, her voice still raspy from the smoke. "I don't believe we've met," Kieran nodded, wincing slightly as Martha dabbed at a burn on his forearm. "Kieran Abernathy, been working at the Sanchez Ranch for about 3 weeks now." "Elizabeth Jameson," she replied. "My father and I own the place that just—" Her voice faltered as the reality of what had happened sank in. The barn her father had spent months building was now nothing but flames against the night sky. "I'm sorry about your barn," Kieran said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Was anyone else inside? Animals?" Elizabeth shook her head. "The horses got out when the fire first started. I was checking on a new foal when I knocked over a lantern. It happened so fast." Tears welled in her eyes, partly from the lingering smoke, partly from the shock and guilt. "It's not your fault," Kieran assured her. "Accidents happen out here. The important thing is you're alive." Dr. Morrison finished his examination and declared them both lucky minor burns and smoke exposure, but nothing life-threatening. "You'll both need rest and plenty of water," he instructed. "And Miss Jameson, I'll give you something for that cough." As they prepared to leave, Martha brought a clean shirt for Kieran, as his own was singed beyond repair. "Your father will be worried sick," the doctor's wife said to Elizabeth. "Sheriff Hendricks rode out to inform him of the fire." Elizabeth's face paled. Her father, William Jameson, had gone to Santa Fe on business and wasn't due back for another day. "He's not home," she said quietly. "It's just been me at the ranch since yesterday." Martha exchanged glances with her husband. "You can't stay there alone tonight, not after what's happened. You'll stay with us." "No," Elizabeth insisted, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I need to be there when Father returns. There's still the house and the rest of the property to look after." "I'll take her home," Kieran offered unexpectedly, surprising even himself. "I can keep an eye on things until her father returns." Elizabeth looked at him with grateful but uncertain eyes. "You don't have to do that. You've already done more than enough." "I insist," Kieran said firmly. "Besides, I need to make sure the person I just pulled from a burning building doesn't do something foolish like try to salvage what's left of that barn in the dark." Dr. Morrison frowned. "It's not exactly proper, Miss Jameson, a young woman alone with a man she's just met." "With all due respect, Doctor," Kieran said, "propriety seems less important than safety tonight. I'll sleep in the barn, what's left of it, or on the porch if need be." Elizabeth, too tired and shaken to argue further, nodded her agreement. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy." The ride to the Jameson ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts as they shared Kieran's horse. Elizabeth sat in front, cradled securely in his arms as he held the reins. She could feel the solid strength of him against her back, and despite everything, she felt safe. The night air had cleared the smoke from their lungs, replaced by the scent of sage and open desert. The stars above were brilliant against the black canvas of the New Mexico sky, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded below them. As they approached the ranch, Elizabeth could see the glow of the still burning barn in the distance. The main house, thankfully, stood untouched about 100 yards away, a modest structure her father had built with plans to expand once their horse breeding business took off. "Home, sweet home," she murmured as Kieran helped her down from the horse. "It's a good piece of land," he observed, taking in the surroundings. The house sat on a gentle rise, offering views of the valley below and the mountains beyond. A small creek ran near the property, providing precious water in this arid landscape. Inside, Elizabeth moved mechanically, lighting lamps and stoking the fire in the small stove. Her hands trembled slightly as the events of the evening caught up with her. "Sit," Kieran commanded gently. "I'll make some coffee," she obeyed, sinking into one of the sturdy wooden chairs at the kitchen table. "The coffee's in the tin on the shelf," she said, watching as he moved about her kitchen with unexpected ease. Not my first time making coffee, he said with a hint of a smile, correctly interpreting her surprised expression. As the water boiled, Kieran took stock of the modest home. It was clean and well-ordered, with touches that spoke of the Eastern refinement. Elizabeth had brought with her a small shelf of books, curtains at the windows, a rag rug brightening the plank floor. It wasn't the typical bachelor setup of most homesteaders. "How long have you and your father been in Cimarron?" he asked, pouring the coffee into 2 chipped mugs. 3 months, Elizabeth replied, accepting the steaming cup with grateful hands. "Father always dreamed of raising horses out west. When Mother died last year, there was nothing keeping us in Boston anymore." Kieran nodded, understanding the pull of a fresh start. "And you, did you share his dream?" Elizabeth's green eyes met his, a flash of candor in them. "No," she admitted. "I was content in Boston. I had friends, books, music, but Father is all I have now, and I couldn't let him come alone." "That took courage," Kieran said, respect evident in his voice. "Not as much courage as running into a burning building for a stranger," she countered. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Outside, the glow from the barn had dimmed, the fire burning itself out now that there was little left to consume. "I should check the horses," Elizabeth said suddenly, setting down her cup. "We managed to get them into the corral, but after the fire." "I'll do it," Kieran offered, already standing. "You need rest. Doctor's orders, remember?" Elizabeth wanted to protest, but found she lacked the energy. The adrenaline that had kept her going was rapidly fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. "Thank you," she said simply. Kieran paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. I'll knock 3 times when I return." After he'd gone, Elizabeth moved around the small house, securing doors and windows as much from habit as necessity. Crime was rare in Cimarron, but her father had instilled Eastern caution in her. As she changed into a clean nightgown and washed the soot from her face, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin. Her usually pale complexion was flushed, her auburn hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. A small burn marked her cheek, and her eyes looked larger than usual, still reflecting the fear she'd experienced. But she was alive, thanks to Kieran Abernathy. Who was this cowboy who had risked his life for her without hesitation? She knew nothing about him beyond his name and where he worked. Yet there was something in those blue eyes of his that had made her trust him immediately, a steadiness, an integrity that transcended their brief acquaintance. She was brushing out her hair when the promised 3 knocks came at the door. "The horses are settled," Kieran reported when she opened it. "A bit spooked still, but no injuries that I could see." "Thank goodness for small mercies," Elizabeth sighed. "Mr. Abernathy, I've made up the sofa for you. It's not much, but it's better than the porch." Kieran looked like he might protest, but the genuine gratitude in her eyes stopped him. "Thank you, Miss Jameson." "Elizabeth," she corrected him. "I think pulling someone from a fire puts you on a first-name basis, don't you?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Kieran then. "Good night, Kieran," she said softly, "and thank you again. For everything." As Elizabeth retreated to her small bedroom, closing the door behind her, Kieran stood in the modest living area, suddenly aware of how much his life had changed in the span of a few hours. He had ridden into danger without a second thought because someone needed help. It was what any decent man would do. What he hadn't expected was the immediate connection he felt to the woman with the green eyes and quiet strength. Stretching out on the sofa that was too short for his tall frame, Kieran stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the night through the open window. The distant howl of a coyote, the gentle nickering of horses in the corral, the whisper of wind through the scrub brush. And somewhere in the house, the soft breathing of Elizabeth Jameson, the woman he had saved and who, unknowingly, might just be saving something in him as well. Elizabeth woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, the events of the previous night rushing back in fragments, the fire, the smoke, strong arms carrying her to safety. She dressed quickly in a simple blue skirt and white blouse, pinning her hair in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. In the kitchen, she found Kieran at the stove, his back to her. He had rolled up the sleeves of his borrowed shirt, revealing tanned forearms and the same burn the doctor had treated last night. "Good morning," she said, and he turned, a spatula in hand. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the stove. "Figured you could use a hot breakfast after last night." "Not at all," Elizabeth replied, secretly relieved. She was a competent cook by necessity, but it wasn't a skill she particularly enjoyed. "It smells wonderful." They ate at the small kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the window, casting everything in a golden light that made the horrors of the previous night seem distant. Elizabeth studied Kieran openly now, taking in the details she had missed in the chaos, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the temples, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, the capable hands that handled the delicate china with surprising gentleness. "I need to check what can be salvaged from the barn," she said after they'd finished eating. "Father will want a full accounting when he returns." Kieran nodded. "I'll help. Then I should probably get back to the Sanchez ranch. Miguel will be wondering where I disappeared to." A strange disappointment filled Elizabeth at his words, though she knew it was irrational. Of course he had a job to return to. He couldn't stay here indefinitely playing protector to a woman he barely knew. Together they walked to what remained of the barn, little more than charred timbers and ash. The morning light revealed the full extent of the destruction, and Elizabeth's heart sank. It would take months and money they didn't have to rebuild. "At least the horses are safe," Kieran said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Structures can be rebuilt." "Father put everything we had into this place," Elizabeth said quietly. "I don't know if we can afford to start over." Kieran was quiet for a moment, surveying the damage with a practiced eye. "The foundation stones are intact," he observed, "and there's good timber in these hills. It wouldn't be cheap, but it wouldn't be impossible either." They spent the next hour sifting through the debris, recovering what little could be saved: metal tools that had survived the heat, a few pieces of tack that had been stored in a metal trunk, nails that could be straightened and reused. As they worked, Elizabeth found herself stealing glances at Kieran. There was an easy competence in the way he moved, a man accustomed to physical labor and the harsh realities of Western life. Yet there was a gentleness, too, in how he helped her over the more treacherous sections of debris, how he made sure she took breaks to rest and drink water. "You're not what I expected from a cowboy," she said finally, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Kieran's eyebrow raised in amusement. "And what did you expect, Miss Elizabeth?" She blushed slightly at being caught in her assumptions. "I don't know, someone rougher, I suppose, less." She struggled for the right word. "Civilized," he supplied with a wry smile. "Thoughtful," she corrected him. Their eyes met across the pile of salvaged items, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Elizabeth turned to see her father's wagon coming up the road, the older man driving with uncharacteristic speed. William Jameson was in his early 50s, his once auburn hair now streaked with gray, his face weathered from years of work outdoors. He pulled the wagon to a halt in a cloud of dust, jumping down with an agility that belied his age. "Elizabeth," he called, relief evident in his voice as he strode toward them. "Sheriff Hendricks found me on the road. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Father," she assured him, accepting his fierce embrace. "Thanks to Mr. Abernathy here." William turned to Kieran, taking in the tall stranger with his daughter. "You're the one who pulled her from the fire." "Yes, sir," Kieran confirmed, extending his hand. "Kieran Abernathy. I work over at the Sanchez place." William shook his hand firmly. "I don't know how to thank you, son, if anything had happened to my Elizabeth." "No thanks necessary, Mr. Jameson. I'm just glad I was able to help." William surveyed the ruins of his barn, his expression grim but resolute. "Well, it could have been worse. The house is standing, the horses are alive, and most importantly, my daughter is safe." He turned back to Kieran. "Will you stay for lunch, Mr. Abernathy? It's the least we can offer." Kieran glanced at Elizabeth, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored, sir. But then I really should get back to the Sanchez ranch. They'll be wondering what happened to me." Of course," William agreed. "Elizabeth, why don't you start on lunch while Mr. Abernathy and I see to the horses?" As Elizabeth headed back to the house, she could hear her father already peppering Kieran with questions about the fire, his experience with horses, how long he'd been in Cimarron. The familiar sound of her father's enthusiasm brought a smile to her face. William Jameson had never met a stranger he couldn't turn into a friend within an hour. In the kitchen, she busied herself preparing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold ham left from the day before. Her mind, however, kept returning to Kieran, the way he had carried her from the fire, the gentle concern in his eyes as he tended to her afterward, the unexpected domesticity of finding him cooking breakfast in her kitchen. Elizabeth had had suitors in Boston, proper young men with good prospects who had called at her father's house with flowers and practiced compliments. None of them had made her feel the way she did after just one day in Kieran Abernathy's company, safe, seen, and strangely exhilarated. It was foolish, she told herself firmly. She barely knew the man. He was a drifting cowboy, and she was still finding her place in this rugged new world. Whatever she was feeling was simply gratitude mixed with the heightened emotions that followed a brush with death. Nothing more. By the time the men returned to the house, Elizabeth had composed herself and set the table. William was talking animatedly, clearly impressed with the young cowboy who had saved his daughter. "Mr. Abernathy here knows his horses," William announced as they washed up at the basin by the door. "Says he's worked on ranches from Texas to Montana." "Is that so?" Elizabeth replied, placing a pitcher of water on the table. "You've traveled extensively then." Kieran nodded, taking the seat her father indicated. "Never found a reason to stay in one place too long, until now, perhaps." The way he looked at her as he said this sent a flutter through Elizabeth's stomach that she quickly suppressed. Lunch was a pleasant affair, with William doing most of the talking. He outlined his plans to rebuild the barn, bigger and better than before, waving off Elizabeth's concerns about finances. "The horses are bringing in good money," he assured them both, "and I made some promising contacts in Santa Fe. We'll be fine." Elizabeth wasn't convinced, but knew better than to argue with her father when he was in this optimistic mood. As the meal concluded, Kieran reluctantly announced that he really should be getting back. "Miguel's a good boss, but he expects his hands to show up for work eventually." William walked him to the door while Elizabeth cleared the dishes, trying not to listen to their conversation but catching bits of it anyway. "You're welcome at our table anytime, son," her father was saying. "A man who would risk his life for my daughter will always have a friend in William Jameson." "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." There was a pause, and Elizabeth strained to hear what followed. "And if you're looking for more steady work," her father continued, "we could use a man with your knowledge of horses once we get the barn rebuilt." Elizabeth nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Was her father offering Kieran a job? The thought of seeing him regularly sent another of those disconcerting flutters through her midsection. "That's generous of you, Mr. Jameson. I'll certainly consider it." Elizabeth moved to the doorway as Kieran prepared to leave. He had retrieved his hat from where it had been left the night before, and now he turned it in his hands, suddenly seeming uncertain. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Abernathy," she said, extending her hand formally. He took it, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Kieran," he reminded her softly, "and it was my pleasure, Elizabeth." The way he said her name, with a slight lilting emphasis on the second syllable, made it sound like something precious. "Perhaps we'll see you in town sometime," she offered, reluctant to simply say goodbye. "Count on it," he replied, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned to mount his horse. Elizabeth and her father watched as he rode away, his figure gradually becoming smaller against the vast New Mexico landscape. "Fine young man," William commented, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Don't you think?" Elizabeth could only nod, afraid that if she spoke, her voice might betray the complicated emotions swirling within her. Instead, she leaned into her father's embrace, grateful for his solid presence and the fact that, despite everything, they still had each other and this land they were learning to call home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, William Jameson threw himself into the task of rebuilding the barn with characteristic enthusiasm. Neighbors from miles around came to help, bringing tools, lumber, and strong backs. It was one of the things Elizabeth had come to appreciate about life in the West, the way communities rallied around those in need, regardless of how long they'd known each other. Elizabeth herself was kept busy cooking for the workers, managing the household, and tending to the horses. Her father had insisted she continue giving riding lessons to the children of Cimarron's wealthier families, a small but steady source of income that had become even more important now. She had seen Kieran Abernathy only twice since the fire, once in town when she was picking up supplies at the general store, and once when he rode by with a group of Sanchez ranch hands moving cattle. Both times their interactions had been brief, but charged with an undercurrent of something unspoken. He had tipped his hat, asked after her health and her father's progress with the barn, and she had responded with polite inquiries about his work at the Sanchez ranch. It was all perfectly proper, and yet Elizabeth found herself thinking about him at odd moments, when she was hanging laundry on the line, when she was brushing down her mare in the evening, when she was lying awake listening to the coyotes howl in the distance. She wondered about his life before Cimarron, what had made him a drifter, whether he thought of her at all when they weren't in each other's presence. One evening in early June, about a month after the fire, Elizabeth was sitting on the front porch enjoying a rare moment of quiet. The new barn was nearly complete, an impressive structure that stood taller and wider than its predecessor. Her father was in town meeting with a potential buyer for 2 of their yearlings, and she had the ranch to herself. The sun was setting, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple, when she noticed a rider approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized the way he sat in the saddle, straight-backed but relaxed, at one with his horse. Her heart quickened as Kieran drew closer, finally bringing his mount to a halt at the edge of the yard. He dismounted with fluid grace, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Evening, Miss Elizabeth," he called, his voice carrying on the still air. "Mr. Abernathy," she replied, rising to her feet. "This is an unexpected pleasure." He climbed the porch steps, hat in hand, and Elizabeth was struck again by how his presence seemed to fill any space he occupied. He was clean-shaven today, his dark hair slightly damp as if he'd recently washed, and he wore a shirt she hadn't seen before, deep blue, bringing out the color of his eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, a question in his tone. "Not at all. Father's in town, but he should be back shortly." "Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "Actually," Kieran said, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor, "it was you I came to see." Elizabeth felt a blush rising to her cheeks and was grateful for the fading light that hopefully concealed it. "Oh, what can I do for you?" Kieran seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about your father's offer about working here once the barn is finished." "And," Elizabeth prompted when he paused, "and I've decided to accept if the offer still stands." Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected in its intensity. "That's wonderful news," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Father will be delighted." "And you?" Kieran asked, his gaze steady on hers. "How do you feel about it?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In Boston, men and women danced around such personal inquiries, couching everything in layers of polite circumlocution. But Kieran Abernathy, she was learning, was not a man who wasted time with social niceties when something important needed to be said. "I think it would be." She searched for a word that wouldn't reveal too much. "Beneficial to have someone with your experience helping father with the horses." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, as if he saw right through her careful phrasing. "Beneficial," he repeated. "Well, I'm glad to hear it." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things neither was quite ready to articulate. "Would you like to see the new barn?" Elizabeth offered finally. "It's nearly complete." "I'd like that very much." They walked side by side across the yard, not touching but close enough that Elizabeth was acutely aware of his presence beside her. The new barn loomed before them, impressive in the twilight. "Your father didn't waste any time," Kieran observed, admiration in his voice. Once he sets his mind to something, there's no stopping him, Elizabeth agreed, pushing open the large double doors. Inside, the smell of fresh cut wood and new hay filled the air. Lanterns hung at intervals, casting warm pools of light through the spacious interior. The stalls were larger than in the original barn, with more room for the growing herd of horses William was so proud of. "It's magnificent," Kieran said, running a hand along one of the smooth wooden posts. "He's built something that will last generations." There was something in his voice, a hint of wistfulness, perhaps, that made Elizabeth look at him more closely. "Have you never wanted that?" she asked softly. "Something of your own that would last?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When you spend your life moving from place to place, you learn not to want things you can't carry with you." "And what about now?" Elizabeth asked, feeling bold in the intimate half-light of the barn. "Are you still just passing through?" He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw a vulnerability that matched her own. "I'm beginning to think I might have found a reason to stay." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Elizabeth was suddenly very aware of how alone they were, how improper it would look if anyone were to find them here in the gathering darkness, and yet she couldn't make herself move away. "Elizabeth," Kieran said, her name a question and a plea all at once. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard broke the spell. Her father had returned. "We should go greet him," Elizabeth said, taking a step back, her heart racing. "He'll want to hear your news." Kieran nodded, disappointment and understanding mingling in his expression. "After you," he said, gesturing toward the door. As they walked back to the house, a respectable distance now between them, Elizabeth wondered what might have happened if her father hadn't returned when he did. Would Kieran have kissed her? Would she have let him? The very thought sent a scandalous thrill through her. William Jameson was delighted with Kieran's decision to accept his job offer. Over a hastily prepared dinner, the two men discussed terms: salary, responsibilities, housing. "You can stay in the old line shack for now," William offered. "It's small but weather-tight. We'll fix it up proper for you." "That's more than generous, sir," Kieran replied. "When would you like me to start?" "How about Monday next? That gives you time to settle your affairs at the Sanchez place." And so it was decided. Kieran would become a permanent part of their lives, working alongside William with the horses, living just a short ride from the main house. The thought filled Elizabeth with both anticipation and trepidation. How would she manage her growing feelings for him with the constant proximity? As the evening concluded and Kieran prepared to leave, William excused himself to check on a mare that was close to foaling, leaving Elizabeth to see their guest out. On the porch, the night air cool against her skin, Elizabeth found herself once again alone with Kieran. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the yard and illuminating his features in gentle relief. "Thank you for the meal," he said. "Your father is a good man." "Yes, he is," Elizabeth agreed. "He thinks very highly of you as well." Kieran took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the soap he must have used before coming to see her. "And his daughter, what does she think of me?" Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. "I think." She began, then paused, gathering her courage. "I think you are unlike anyone I've ever known, Kieran Abernathy." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or desire. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not entirely sure yet," she admitted with a small smile, "but I look forward to finding out." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made her heart skip a beat. "As do I, Elizabeth Jameson, as do I." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked to his horse, mounting up with practiced ease. Elizabeth watched him ride away, her mind already racing ahead to Monday, when he would return not as a visitor, but as a part of her daily life. In the week that followed, Elizabeth found herself oscillating between excitement and anxiety. She threw herself into preparations for Kieran's arrival, ensuring the line shack was properly cleaned and stocked with essentials, reviewing the accounts to confirm they could indeed afford another hand, and most embarrassingly, spending more time than usual on her appearance each morning. "You seem distracted," her father commented one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. "Is everything all right?" Elizabeth started, guilty at being caught in her thoughts. Yes, of course, just thinking about all the work ahead now that the barn is finished. William studied her for a moment, his expression knowing. You've changed since we came west, Elizabeth, grown stronger, more resilient. Have I? She asked, surprised by the observation. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, he said softly. I know I am. Tears pricked at Elizabeth's eyes. They rarely spoke of her mother, the loss still too raw for both of them. Thank you, Father. William cleared his throat, clearly emotional himself. I've been thinking. With Abernathy joining us, I might be able to make more trips to Santa Fe, expand our buyer network. Would you be comfortable managing things here with him while I'm away? The question took Elizabeth by surprise. Her father had always been protective, especially since her mother's death. That he would trust her to run the ranch in his absence, even with Kieran's help, was a significant vote of confidence. I believe I would, she answered honestly. Mr. Abernathy seems very capable. He is, William agreed, and he looks at you the way I used to look at your mother. Elizabeth felt her face flame. Father, you're imagining things, William chuckled, patting her hand. Perhaps, but a father notices these things. Just be careful with your heart, my dear. The West can be hard on gentle souls. Before Elizabeth could formulate a response, William stood and stretched. I'm for bed. Don't stay up too late. Left alone on the porch, Elizabeth replayed her father's words in her mind. Was it so obvious, her attraction to Kieran? And more intriguingly, did Kieran truly look at her with the same admiration her father had held for her mother, a love that had sustained them through decades of marriage? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Monday dawned clear and bright, the June sun already warm as it crested the horizon. Elizabeth was up earlier than usual, checking and rechecking that everything was in order. Her father watched her fluttering about with barely concealed amusement. He's coming to work, Elizabeth, not for a formal inspection, he teased over breakfast. I just want to make a good impression, she replied defensively. This is a business arrangement, after all. William raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, focusing on his eggs with exaggerated interest. Kieran arrived mid-morning, his few possessions packed on a second horse that trailed behind his own. He wore the same easy confidence Elizabeth had come to associate with him, though there was a new lightness to his demeanor that suggested he was pleased with this change in circumstances. William greeted him warmly, helping him unload his things and showing him to the lined shack that would be his new home. Elizabeth hung back, suddenly shy now that the moment had actually arrived. When Kieran finally approached her, hat in hand, she managed a composed smile. Welcome to your new position, Mr. Abernathy. I trust you'll find everything satisfactory. A flicker of amusement crossed his face at her formality. Thank you, Miss Jameson. I'm sure I will. Her father clapped Kieran on the shoulder. Let's get you settled, then I'll show you what needs doing today. We've got horses to train and fences to mend. As the men walked away, Elizabeth took a deep breath, smoothing her skirts with hands that weren't entirely steady. This was going to be more challenging than she had anticipated. How was she supposed to maintain a professional distance when the very sight of him made her pulse quicken? The first few days established a routine. Kieran would arrive at the main house for breakfast, which Elizabeth prepared. The three of them would eat together, discussing the day's tasks before the men headed out to work with the horses or tend to the property. Elizabeth would see them again at lunch, which she would either bring to them in the fields or serve at the house, depending on where they were working. Evenings were for dinner, sometimes followed by conversation on the porch if the day hadn't been too exhausting. It was all perfectly respectable, and yet Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet moments when she and Kieran would find themselves alone passing tools in the barn, fetching water from the well, sitting side by side on the porch steps as the sun set. They talked of many things during these stolen moments. Kieran told her of his childhood in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who had died young, leaving him to make his own way in the world. He spoke of the places he had seen in his years of drifting the majestic mountains of Colorado, the endless plains of Kansas, the red rocks of Arizona Territory. In turn, Elizabeth shared stories of her life in Boston, the music and books she missed, the friends she had left behind, her mother's gentle guidance that had shaped her into the woman she was. "You regret coming west?" Kieran asked her one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "I did at first," she admitted. "Everything was so different, the landscape, the people, the expectations. In Boston, a lady wasn't expected to know how to birth a foal or shoot a rattlesnake." Kieran laughed softly at that. "And now," she turned to look at him, his profile strong against the darkening sky, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Elizabeth knew with absolute certainty that her feelings for Kieran Abernathy had grown far beyond simple gratitude or attraction. Whether it was love, she couldn't yet say. She had too little experience with the emotion to be sure, but it was something deep and powerful that both exhilarated and frightened her. "Nor can I," Kieran replied softly, and she suspected he wasn't just talking about Cimarron. The moment was interrupted by William calling from inside the house, asking Elizabeth to bring him his reading glasses. The spell broken, she rose quickly, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. "I should go in," she said, not quite meeting Kieran's eyes now. "Elizabeth," he said, stopping her with just her name. "I'm glad your father hired me." The simple statement carried a weight of meaning that made her smile despite her confusion. "So am I, Kieran, so am I." As June gave way to July, the heat of the New Mexico summer intensified. Days were spent in hard work, training horses for both breeding and sale, maintaining the property, and preparing for the annual Cimarron Summer Festival, an event Elizabeth had heard much about but had yet to experience. "The whole town comes out for it," her father explained one evening at dinner. "Horse races, dancing, food from every family for miles around. It's quite the spectacle." "It's a good time," Kieran agreed, having attended the previous year shortly after arriving in the area. "The Sanchez Ranch usually enters several horses in the races. Will we be participating?" William nodded enthusiastically. "I've been training Thunderbolt specifically for the main race. With your help, I think he stands a chance of winning." Thunderbolt was their prize stallion, a magnificent black thoroughbred with a white blaze down his face. He was fast but temperamental, responding best to Kieran's steady hand. "And you, Elizabeth," her father continued, "you'll need a new dress for the dance." Elizabeth looked up from her plate in surprise. "A dance, of course. It's the social event of the season. Every eligible young man in the county will be hoping for a turn around the floor with you." Elizabeth felt Kieran's eyes on her but didn't dare look at him. The thought of dancing with strangers while he watched was oddly disappointing. "I'm not much of a dancer," she demurred. "Nonsense," William insisted. "Your mother had you taking lessons from the time you could walk. Next time we're in town, we'll visit Mrs. Holbrook. She's a fine seamstress." The subject was closed, and Elizabeth resigned herself to the inevitable. A new dress would be nice, she supposed. And perhaps Kieran would ask her to dance. The thought sustained her through the next few days of intense heat and hard work. William took Thunderbolt and 2 other horses into town to register them for the races, leaving Elizabeth and Kieran to manage the ranch alone. They worked well together, moving through tasks with an efficiency born of growing familiarity. Kieran showed her how to mend a section of fence that had come loose, his hands guiding hers on the tools with careful instruction. Elizabeth taught him which herbs in her small garden were best for treating minor horse ailments, their shoulders brushing as they bent to examine the plants. In the afternoon heat, they retreated to the shade of the porch, Elizabeth bringing out a pitcher of cool water flavored with mint from her garden. They sat side by side on the steps, closer than propriety might allow if anyone had been there to see. "Tell me about the festival dance," Elizabeth said, watching a hawk circle lazily in the sky above. "What should I expect?" Kieran took a long drink of water before answering. "It's nothing like what you'd be used to in Boston, I expect. The town hall is decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. There's a local fellow who plays fiddle, another on banjo, and Mrs. Eaton from the boarding house pounds away at an old piano. They're not half bad." Elizabeth smiled at his description. And the dancing itself, lively, Kieran said with a chuckle. Mostly reels and squares, some waltzes toward the end of the night when everyone's too tired for the faster numbers. You dance, Mr. Abernathy? Elizabeth asked, unable to resist the question. Kieran's blue eyes met hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the occasion calls for it, Miss Jameson, something in his tone made her breath catch. And will the occasion call for it at the festival? He leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I certainly hope so. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken desires. Elizabeth found herself leaning toward him as well, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Kieran's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he might kiss her. The sound of an approaching wagon shattered the moment. They sprang apart just as Liam Caldwell, their nearest neighbor, came into view. Afternoon, Miss Jameson, Abernathy, Caldwell called as he pulled his team to a halt. Hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all, Mr. Caldwell, Elizabeth replied, rising to her feet and hoping the flush in her cheeks could be attributed to the heat. What brings you by, returning your father's breeding records, he said, holding up a leather-bound book. Mighty helpful they were. Is he about? In town, Kieran answered, his voice remarkably steady despite what had almost transpired between them moments before. Registering horses for the races. Caldwell nodded, handing the book to Elizabeth. Well, give him my thanks. You folks coming to the festival next Saturday? We are, Elizabeth confirmed, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. Good, good. It'll be quite the affair this year. Mayor's ordered special decorations all the way from Santa Fe. Caldwell tipped his hat. Best be on my way, more stops to make before sundown. As he drove away, Elizabeth found she couldn't quite look at Kieran. What had almost happened between them felt too significant to simply ignore, yet too delicate to address directly. I should check on the new foal, Kieran said after a moment of charged silence. She was favoring her left front leg this morning. Yes, of course, Elizabeth agreed quickly, grateful for the reprieve. I'll start on dinner. As she watched him walk toward the barn, shoulders straight and stride purposeful, Elizabeth pressed a hand to her racing heart. Whatever was growing between them couldn't be ignored much longer. The question was whether either of them was ready for what acknowledging it might mean. The day of the Cimarron Summer Festival dawned clear and hot, the sky an endless expanse of blue unmarred by clouds. Elizabeth stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the new dress Mrs. Holbrook had finished just in time. It was simpler than what she would have worn to a Boston social event, but beautiful nonetheless, pale green cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The skirt full, but not ostentatiously so. Her father had already gone ahead with the horses, leaving Kieran to escort Elizabeth into town once she was ready. The arrangement made her both nervous and excited. They hadn't been alone together since the near kiss on the porch, both of them careful to maintain a friendly but proper distance in the days that followed. A knock at the front door announced his arrival. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth pinned her hat in place and went to greet him. Kieran stood on the porch, and the sight of him took her breath away. He was dressed in what were clearly his best clothes, a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that had been carefully pressed. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw. Miss Jameson, he said, removing his hat. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. You look beautiful. The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. You look quite handsome yourself. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I clean up reasonably well when the occasion demands it. That you do, Elizabeth agreed, locking the door behind her. Shall we? Kieran had brought the buggy around, the same one her father used for trips to town. He helped her up, his hand warm and strong beneath hers, then circled around to take his place beside her. The bench seat wasn't particularly wide, and Elizabeth was acutely aware of his proximity as they set off toward town. Your father says Thunderbolt has a good chance in the race today, Kieran said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. He's been training him hard, Elizabeth agreed, though I suspect your influence has had more to do with the improvement in his temperament than anything else. Kieran shot her a quick, pleased glance. He's a fine animal, just needed to learn to trust. Something about the way he said it made Elizabeth wonder if they were still talking about the horse. Trust is important, she said softly, especially when you've been hurt before. Kieran's hands tightened slightly on the reins. Yes, he agreed, his voice equally soft. Though sometimes the risk is worth taking. Their eyes met briefly, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Elizabeth felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Perhaps today, away from the ranch and its responsibilities, they might find the opportunity to address what was growing between them. Cimarron was transformed for the festival. Bunting in red, white, and blue hung from every building along the main street, and tables had been set up in the town square, laden with food prepared by the local women. Children ran about, excited by the prospect of races and games, while men gathered in small groups, discussing horses and weather and crops. Kieran helped Elizabeth down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The touch sent a shiver up her spine despite the summer heat. "There you are," William called, spotting them as he emerged from the livery stable where the race horses were being kept until the afternoon events. "Come see how Thunderbolt is doing. He's in fine form today." They followed him into the cool dimness of the stable, where several horses were being prepared for the races. Thunderbolt stood proud in his stall, coat gleaming from a recent grooming, ears pricked forward with interest as they approached. "He looks ready to run," Kieran observed, running a practiced hand down the horse's powerful neck. "That he does," William agreed enthusiastically. "Patterson from the Double P Ranch has entered his bay stallion, and Miguel Sanchez has 2 horses in the race. It'll be stiff competition, but I think our boy here has the heart to win." Elizabeth watched as Kieran spoke softly to the horse, his connection with the animal evident in the way Thunderbolt responded to his voice and touch. It was one of the things she most admired about him, his innate understanding of these magnificent creatures, his patience and firmness tempered with genuine affection. "Miss Jameson," a voice called from the stable entrance. Elizabeth turned to see Sarah Miller, the doctor's daughter and one of the few young women in Cimarron close to her own age. "I've been looking everywhere for you. We need your help with the flower arrangements for the dance tonight." Elizabeth glanced at her father, who waved her off. "Go on, daughter. Kieran and I have matters well in hand here. The races don't start for another 2 hours." "I'll see you both later then," Elizabeth said, smiling at Kieran before following Sarah out into the sunshine. The morning passed quickly in a flurry of preparations. Elizabeth found herself enjoying the companionship of the other women as they transformed the town hall for the evening's festivities. Sarah Miller proved to be friendly and talkative, filling Elizabeth in on all the local gossip as they worked. "So," Sarah said casually as they arranged wildflowers in mason jars, "you and Mr. Abernathy seem quite friendly." Elizabeth nearly dropped the jar she was holding. "He works for my father," she replied, aiming for a neutral tone. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "He's quite handsome. Half the young women in town were heartbroken when he took the position at your ranch. Is that so?" Elizabeth couldn't help the small spark of jealousy the information kindled. "Oh yes," Sarah confirmed, "but he never showed particular interest in any of them, not until you." Elizabeth busied herself with the flowers, not trusting herself to respond without giving away her feelings. "It's all right, you know," Sarah continued more gently. "To care for him, he's a good man by all accounts, honest, hardworking. He saved my life," Elizabeth said quietly. "When our barn burned," Sarah nodded. "The whole town heard about that. It was very brave of him." "Yes, it was." Elizabeth straightened, meeting her new friend's gaze directly. "But that's not why I admire him for many reasons beyond his courage that night." Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "I can see that, and from the way he looks at you, the feeling is mutual." Before Elizabeth could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. The races were about to begin. The makeshift track ran along the edge of town, a straight stretch marked with flags that would test both speed and endurance. Spectators lined both sides, cheering for their favorites as the horses were brought to the starting line. Elizabeth found her father and Kieran near the finish, William nervously adjusting his collar as Thunderbolt was led past by one of the local boys who would ride him in the race. "There you are," William said when he spotted her. "Just in time, they're about to start." Kieran stood slightly apart, his attention focused on the horses, but he turned when she approached, a smile lighting his eyes. "The hall looks beautiful," he said. "Everyone's talking about it." "Thank you," Elizabeth replied, pleased that he had noticed her work. "Though I can't take all the credit." The crack of a pistol shot signaled the start of the race, and all attention turned to the track. 6 horses thundered past in a cloud of dust, hooves pounding the hard, packed earth as they stretched into full gallop. Thunderbolt, with his distinctive black coat and white blaze, was running third, the young rider low over his neck. "Come on, boy," William muttered, clenching his fists at his sides. "Show them what you can do." As if hearing his master's encouragement, Thunderbolt surged forward, closing the gap between himself and the leaders. The crowd's cheers grew louder as the horses approached the halfway point. Elizabeth found herself caught up in the excitement, her heart racing as fast as the horses. Without thinking, she reached out and grasped Kieran's hand, needing an anchor in the moment of suspense. He looked down at their joined hands in surprise, then back at her face, a question in his eyes. Elizabeth didn't let go, instead giving his fingers a small squeeze. His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. On the track, Thunderbolt had pulled even with the leader, a chestnut from the Double P Ranch. The 2 horses ran neck and neck, neither willing to yield. The finish line approached, the crowd's cheers reaching a crescendo. With a final burst of speed, Thunderbolt thrust his nose ahead just as they crossed the line, winning by less than half a length. The crowd erupted in applause and shouts, none louder than William Jameson. "He did it," William exulted, pumping his fist in the air. "By God, he did it." In the excitement, Elizabeth found herself swept into a celebratory embrace, first by her father, then, before she could catch her breath, by Kieran. His arms were strong around her, lifting her briefly off her feet in his enthusiasm. The embrace was over almost as quickly as it had begun, propriety reasserting itself, but the feeling of being held against his chest lingered long after he had set her down. The afternoon continued with more races and contests, a welcome distraction from the charged moment they had shared. William received congratulations from all sides for Thunderbolt's victory, his face flushed with pride and pleasure. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, people started drifting toward the town hall for the dance. Lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festively decorated interior. The musicians were tuning their instruments, and tables along the walls groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and other refreshments. Elizabeth stood with Sarah near the entrance, watching as couples and families filtered in. She had lost track of Kieran after the races, and despite herself, she scanned the crowd for his tall figure. "Looking for someone?" Sarah teased gently. Elizabeth was saved from having to reply by the arrival of her father, now dressed in his Sunday best. "Elizabeth, my dear, you look radiant," William said, giving her an affectionate peck on the cheek. "I've just come from checking on Thunderbolt. He's resting comfortably with a special treat for his performance today." "And Kieran?" The question slipped out before Elizabeth could stop it. Her father's eyes twinkled knowingly. "He said he needed to fetch something from the mercantile before it closed, should be along directly." The musicians struck up a lively reel, and couples began to form for the first dance. William was immediately claimed by Mrs. Caldwell, whose husband was deep in conversation about cattle prices and unlikely to dance even if asked. Elizabeth found herself standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the room, watching as the dancers whirled past in a colorful blur. Despite her Boston upbringing and the dancing lessons her father had mentioned, she felt suddenly unsure of herself in this unfamiliar setting. "May I have this dance, Miss Jameson?" The voice behind her sent a thrill of recognition through her body. Turning, she found Kieran standing there, hat in hand, a slight nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "I would be delighted, Mr. Abernathy," she replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. He led her onto the floor just as the music changed to a waltz. One hand went respectfully to her waist, the other holding hers as they began to move in time with the music. "You dance very well," Elizabeth observed, surprised by his grace. "For a cowboy," Kieran's laugh was low and warm. "My mother insisted I learn, said a man never knew when such skills might come in handy. She was a wise woman." "That she was," he agreed, a touch of sadness in his voice. "She would have liked you." The simple statement held such meaning that Elizabeth felt a lump form in her throat. "And I'm sure I would have liked her." They moved together as if they had danced 100 times before, their bodies finding a natural harmony that made conversation unnecessary. Elizabeth was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the slight pressure guiding her through the steps, the warmth of his palm against hers. All around them, other couples twirled and swayed, but to Elizabeth, they might as well have been alone in the room. The music, the decorations, the murmur of conversation all faded into the background, leaving only this moment, this man, in perfect clarity. As the waltz drew to a close, Kieran held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice low and intimate despite their public setting. Before he could continue, they were interrupted by William, who had escaped Mrs. Caldwell and was now approaching with 2 glasses of punch. "Splendid dancing, both of you," he said, seemingly oblivious to the moment he had broken. "Elizabeth, you put all the Boston debutantes to shame." "Thank you, father," she replied, accepting the punch gratefully. The dance had left her flushed and breathless, though whether from the exertion or Kieran's proximity was hard to say. The evening continued, a whirl of dances and conversations. Elizabeth partnered with several other men, the doctor's son, a rancher from the north end of the valley, even the mayor for a particularly energetic reel. But her eyes kept finding Kieran across the room, and more often than not, she would discover he was already watching her. As the night wore on, the crowd thinned somewhat. Families with young children departed, as did some of the older residents. The music grew slower, more romantic, as the musicians played the last few songs of the evening. Elizabeth had stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, the heat inside the hall having grown somewhat oppressive. She stood on the small porch, looking up at the star-filled New Mexico sky when she heard the door open behind her. "I've been looking for you," Kieran said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Your father was concerned." "I just needed some air," she explained. "It was getting rather warm inside." Kieran nodded, his profile strong against the night sky. "It's a beautiful evening." "Yes, it is." Elizabeth glanced sideways at him, gathering her courage. "I've enjoyed today very much, as have I." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light from the lanterns. "Elizabeth, there's something I need to say to you." Her heart began to race. "Yes." Kieran took a deep breath. "When I pulled you from that barn, I was just doing what anyone would do, but since then, getting to know you, working alongside you and your father, I've come to feel something I never expected to feel." Elizabeth held her breath, afraid to speak lest she break the spell of this moment. "I know I'm not the kind of man your father probably imagined for you," Kieran continued. "I don't have much to offer beyond my 2 hands and a willingness to work hard. But I've never met anyone like you, Elizabeth Jameson. You're strong and kind and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you far more than I should." "Kieran," she began, but he held up a hand, asking her to let him finish. "I'm not asking for anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel, that when I look at you, I see possibilities I never allowed myself to consider before. A home, a future. A family, perhaps someday." The words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning and hope and fear. Elizabeth felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his confession. "When I came west with my father," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, "I thought I was leaving behind everything I cared about. I never imagined I might find someone who would make me grateful for that journey." Kieran took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And have you found someone?" Elizabeth looked up at him, no longer hiding the feelings that had been growing within her for weeks. "Yes, Kieran, I believe I have." The moment seemed suspended in time, the distant sound of music from inside, the chirp of crickets in the darkness, the gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and pine. And then Kieran was leaning down, his intent clear in his eyes, giving her every chance to step away if she wished. Instead, Elizabeth lifted her face to his, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, before deepening into something that spoke of longing too long denied. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, tender in a way that made her heart ache with newfound happiness. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I pulled you from that fire," he admitted. Elizabeth laughed softly, even covered in soot and coughing up smoke. "Even then," he confirmed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, "maybe especially then, you looked at me like I was some kind of hero." "You were," she said simply. "You are." The door to the hall opened, spilling light and music onto the porch. They stepped apart quickly, though not so quickly as to appear guilty, as William Jameson emerged. "There you two are," he said, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely surprised to find them together. "The last dance is about to start." Elizabeth glanced at Kieran, a silent question in her eyes. He offered her his arm with a smile that held promises for the future. "Shall we?" he asked. As they returned to the hall for the final waltz of the evening, Elizabeth felt as though she were floating rather than walking. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight she had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. The weeks following the Cimarron Summer Festival brought changes to the Jameson Ranch, some visible, like the continued improvements to the new barn and the construction of additional corrals. Others more subtle, but no less significant. Kieran had spoken to William the day after the dance, formally asking permission to court Elizabeth. Her father, showing none of the surprise Elizabeth had expected, gave his blessing with one condition: that Kieran's intentions be honorable and that he continue to treat Elizabeth with the respect she deserved. "She's all I have left of her mother," William had said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Her happiness means everything to me." "I understand, sir," Kieran had replied, "and I swear to you her happiness will be my highest priority as well." So began a courtship that was both traditional in its respect for propriety and unique in its setting. There were no theater outings or formal dinners as there might have been in Boston. Instead, Kieran and Elizabeth found romance in shared responsibilities and the small moments that punctuated their days. He taught her to shoot, standing close behind her to adjust her aim, his breath warm against her ear as he explained about sightlines and steady hands. She read to him in the evenings as he worked on braiding a new bridle, her voice bringing to life the adventures of characters from her favorite books. They rode together across the property, Elizabeth showing Kieran the secret places she had discovered since coming west: a hidden spring surrounded by wildflowers, a rocky outcropping that offered views all the way to the distant mountains, a stand of cottonwoods where deer often gathered at dawn. Through it all, William watched with approving eyes, seeing in their growing relationship echoes of his own courtship of Elizabeth's mother so many years before. As August drew to a close, bringing with it the first hints of autumn in the cooling night air, Kieran began work on a project he kept secret from Elizabeth. Each evening after dinner, he would disappear to the lined shack or the workshop behind the barn, emerging later with sawdust clinging to his clothes but a satisfied smile on his face. "What are you building out there?" Elizabeth asked one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Patience, Miss Jameson," Kieran teased, using the formal address that had become something of a private joke between them. "All will be revealed in due time." Elizabeth huffed in mock annoyance, but the twinkle in her eyes betrayed her amusement. "You're infuriatingly mysterious sometimes, Mr. Abernathy," He laughed, reaching over to take her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Would you have me any other way?" "No," she admitted softly. "I wouldn't change a single thing about you." The sincerity in her voice made him look at her with such tenderness that she felt her breath catch. In the weeks since their first kiss at the festival, there had been many more such moments of affection, always respectful, always mindful of her father's presence, but growing in intensity as their feelings deepened. "Good," Kieran said, his voice equally soft. "Because I happen to think you're perfect exactly as you are." The compliment brought a blush to Elizabeth's cheeks. Even after weeks of courtship, his ability to make her feel both cherished and desired with just a few words still amazed her. "Now you're just being flattering," she demurred. "Not flattery if it's true," Kieran countered, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. "I'm a simple man, Elizabeth. I say what I mean." The way he said her name, with that slight emphasis on the second syllable, never failed to send a thrill through her. "And what exactly do you mean, Kieran Abernathy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His blue eyes held hers, suddenly serious despite the lightness of their previous banter. "I mean that every day I spend with you confirms what I've known since the night of the fire, that you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and that I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of your affection." Words failed Elizabeth in the face of such raw honesty. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't say aloud: her trust, her admiration, her growing love for this man who had literally walked through fire to find her. When they parted, both a little breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured, though he made no move to leave. "Early start tomorrow." Elizabeth nodded reluctantly. "Father wants to move the yearlings to the north pasture." "And I need to finish my project," Kieran added with a small smile. "Soon, I promise." With one last, lingering kiss, he stood and stepped off the porch. Elizabeth watched him walk toward the lined shack that had become his home, her heart full to bursting with emotions she was only beginning to understand. Whatever he was building, whatever plans he was making, she trusted they were part of a future that included them both. The secret was revealed 3 days later. Elizabeth returned from town, where she had been ordering supplies for the coming winter, to find both her father and Kieran waiting for her with barely contained excitement. "What is it?" she asked, looking from one to the other. "Has something happened?" "Nothing bad," William assured her. "Kieran has something to show you. I've already seen it, and I must say the boy has talent." Kieran looked simultaneously proud and nervous. "If you're not too tired from your trip to town, I'd like to take you to see what I've been working on." "Of course," Elizabeth agreed immediately, her curiosity piqued. Kieran helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. With a nod to William, who was watching with barely concealed satisfaction, he urged the horse forward, heading not toward the barn or workshop as Elizabeth had expected, but toward a small rise about a quarter-mile from the main house. As they crested the hill, Elizabeth gasped. There, nestled among a stand of juniper trees, was a small cabin. It was simple but beautifully crafted, with a covered porch across the front and windows that would catch both the morning and evening light. "Kieran," she breathed, taking in the sight, "did you build this?" "With some help from your father and Liam Caldwell," he admitted as he helped her down from the horse. "But yes, most of it is my work." He led her toward the cabin, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "It's not finished inside yet, just the basic structure and the fireplace. But I wanted you to see it now, to know what I've been planning." Elizabeth followed him up the porch steps, running her hand along the smooth wooden railing he had clearly sanded with great care. The door was solid oak, with a simple brass handle that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Inside, the cabin was indeed unfinished, but already showed promise. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the mantel a single piece of timber that must have taken considerable strength to place. The main room was spacious, with areas clearly designated for a kitchen and living space. 2 doors led off from the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "It's wonderful," Elizabeth said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. But I don't understand. Is this for the ranch, another bunkhouse? Kieran took a deep breath, moving to stand before her. He took both her hands in his expression now entirely serious. Elizabeth Jameson, from the moment I pulled you from that burning barn, something changed in me. The man who had been drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, suddenly found himself wanting to stay. Wanting to build something lasting, not just a home. He gestured around them, but a life with you. Elizabeth felt tears welling in her eyes as she began to understand the significance of what he was showing her, what he was offering. Kieran continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. I love you, Elizabeth. I love your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your courage. I love the way you've embraced this life that was thrust upon you and made it your own. I love watching you with the horses and reading with you in the evenings and seeing the way the western sun turns your hair to fire. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, looking up at her with such raw hope that it nearly broke her heart. I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had in Boston, but I can promise to work every day to make you happy, to build a good life here with you, if you'll have me. Tears were flowing freely down Elizabeth's cheeks now. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Kieran nodded, reaching into his pocket to produce a small silver ring. It was simple but beautiful, with a delicate pattern etched around the band. This was my mother's, he explained. The only thing of value I've carried with me all these years. She told me to give it to the woman I couldn't imagine living without. He took a steadying breath. Elizabeth Jameson, will you marry me? Time seemed to stand still in the small cabin, this space he had built with his own hands, this physical manifestation of his hope for their future together. Elizabeth looked down at this man who had saved her life and then, day by day, shown her what it meant to truly live it fully. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Kieran Abernathy, I will marry you. Joy exploded across his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. Kieran rose to his feet, gathering her into his arms with a laugh that was part relief, part sheer happiness. You've made me the happiest man in New Mexico territory, he said, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle that made her laugh through her tears. When he set her down, she reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this man who had once been a stranger had become the center of her world. I love you, she said simply, the words she had been feeling for weeks finally spoken aloud. I love you, and I can't wait to build a life with you in this beautiful home you've made for us. Kieran's smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss her, a kiss full of promises for their future. A future that had begun the moment he had crashed through the burning barn to save a woman he didn't yet know was his destiny. Winter in Cimarron brought a quiet beauty to the landscape, snow dusting the distant mountains, frost patterns on the windows, smoke curling from chimneys against the clear blue sky. For Elizabeth, it also brought the busy preparations for her wedding, scheduled for the first day of spring. The cabin on the hill was finished by late November, thanks to the combined efforts of Kieran, William, and neighbors who came to help with the more challenging aspects of construction. The interior now boasted polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture that Elizabeth had helped select on a trip to Santa Fe, and colorful rugs that brightened the space and kept the chill at bay. It's starting to feel like a real home, Elizabeth observed one evening in early December as she and Kieran arranged the books they had unpacked her collection from Boston, mixed with volumes he had acquired in his travels. It will be, Kieran replied, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist as they surveyed their handiwork. Just a few more months. They had agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to maintain separate residences until after the wedding, Elizabeth in the main house with her father, Kieran in the line shack. The cabin would remain empty, a promise waiting to be fulfilled when they became husband and wife. The engagement had been announced officially at Thanksgiving, though most of Cimarron had already guessed the news from the way the couple looked at each other. Sarah Miller had been particularly pleased, claiming credit for having encouraged Elizabeth at the festival dance. "I knew from the moment I saw you together that you were meant to be," she declared when Elizabeth showed her the ring. "It was written all over both your faces." Christmas brought a rare snowfall that transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland. Elizabeth had insisted on decorating both the main house and the cabin, bringing evergreen boughs inside to fill the rooms with their fresh scent. She and Kieran had cut a small tree to stand in the corner of the future parlor, decorating it with paper stars and strings of berries. "Our first Christmas tree," Elizabeth said softly as they stood admiring it, a fire crackling in the hearth behind them. "The first of many," Kieran promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. Their wedding plans were simple but meaningful. The ceremony would take place at the small church in Cimarron, followed by a celebration at the ranch that would include everyone in the community who had welcomed Elizabeth and her father so warmly. "It's not the grand society wedding my mother might have envisioned," Elizabeth admitted to her father one evening as they sat going over the guest list. "But I think she would approve nonetheless." William smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes at the mention of his late wife. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, Elizabeth, and she would have adored Kieran for the way he loves you. Do you really think so?" Elizabeth asked, needing the reassurance that this path she had chosen so different from what had been expected of her in Boston would have had her mother's blessing. "I know so," William affirmed. "Catherine never cared much for society's rules. That's why she married me, after all, a man with more dreams than money who wanted to show her the world." Elizabeth smiled at this glimpse into her parents' early relationship. "She never regretted following you west the first time," William shook his head. "There were challenges, certainly. But your mother embraced adventure, much like her daughter." He reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Kieran is a good man, Elizabeth. He reminds me of myself at that age, determined to build something worthwhile, to prove himself worthy of the woman he loves." "He doesn't need to prove anything to me," Elizabeth said softly. "I already know his worth." "Then you're a wise woman," William replied with a smile, "and he's a fortunate man." As January gave way to February and February to March, the days grew incrementally longer, the air gradually warmer. Signs of spring began to appear, green shoots pushing through the soil, birds returning from their winter migration, new foals being born in the stables. Elizabeth found herself increasingly impatient for her wedding day. The preparations were all but complete, her dress hanging ready in her wardrobe, the cabin fully furnished and waiting. All that remained was the final week of waiting, a week that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. "Patience was never your strong suit," her father teased as she paced the porch, watching for Kieran's return from a trip to Santa Fe where he had gone to collect a wedding gift he refused to divulge. "I just want to begin our life together," Elizabeth replied, not bothering to deny her impatience. "We've waited so long already," William chuckled. "6 months is hardly a lifetime, my dear." "It feels like one," she retorted, though her smile took any sting from the words. When Kieran finally appeared on the horizon, Elizabeth had to restrain herself from running to meet him. She waited on the porch, maintaining at least the appearance of decorum as he rode up to the house. "Welcome back, stranger," she called as he dismounted. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind about marrying me," Kieran laughed, securing his horse before climbing the porch steps. "Not a chance, Miss Jameson. I've come too far to turn back now." He looked travel-worn but happy, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. Despite the dust of the trail and the 3-day growth of beard, Elizabeth thought he had never looked more handsome. "Did you find what you were looking for in Santa Fe?" she asked, curious about the mysterious errand that had taken him away. "I did," Kieran confirmed, his expression turning secretive, "but you'll have to wait until our wedding day to see it." Elizabeth pouted playfully. "More secrets." "Haven't I been patient enough?" Kieran stepped closer, lowering his voice though there was no one else to hear. 4 more days, Elizabeth, then we'll have a lifetime with no secrets between us." The promise in his words sent a shiver of anticipation through her. 4 days, she agreed. "I suppose I can manage that." He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of longing and promise and joy to come. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I missed you," he murmured. "And I you," Elizabeth replied. "Don't leave again before the wedding." "I couldn't bear it." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," Kieran promised, his smile warming her from the inside out. The day before the wedding dawned clear and perfect, the sky an endless blue canvas stretched over the New Mexico landscape. Elizabeth woke early, too excited to sleep, and slipped out of the house to watch the sunrise from the porch. As the first golden rays touched the distant mountains, she heard footsteps and turned to find her father joining her, two steaming cups of coffee in his hands. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. Elizabeth shook her head, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Too many thoughts." William nodded, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "Your mother was the same way the night before our wedding." Said her mind was racing with all the possibilities of what was to come. "Were you nervous?" Elizabeth asked, curious about this aspect of her parents' relationship that she had never heard about before. "Terrified," William admitted with a chuckle. "Not of marrying your mother, that was the easiest decision I ever made, but of whether I could be the husband she deserved, provide the life she was accustomed to." Elizabeth smiled, recognizing echoes of Kieran's own concerns in her father's words. "She didn't seem to mind the life you built together." "No," William agreed softly. "She never complained, never looked back with regret. Every challenge we faced together." He turned to look at his daughter, his eyes suspiciously bright. "That's my wish for you and Kieran, Elizabeth. That whatever life brings your way, you'll face it as a team, stronger together than apart." Elizabeth felt tears pricking at her own eyes. "Thank you, Father, for everything, for bringing me west, for hiring Kieran, for supporting us both so completely." William set down his coffee cup to pull her into a fierce embrace. "My darling girl, all I've ever wanted is your happiness. Seeing you with Kieran, watching you build a life together here, it's everything your mother and I could have hoped for you." They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun continued its ascent, bathing the ranch in golden light. Elizabeth could see the cabin on the hill, her future home with Kieran, and felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This place, these people, this was where she belonged. The day passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Sarah Miller arrived mid-morning to help Elizabeth with her wedding attire and to stay the night, as tradition dictated that the groom should not see the bride on the wedding day until she walked down the aisle. Kieran, for his part, was spending his last night as a bachelor at the cabin, making final adjustments to the surprise he had brought back from Santa Fe. William had gone to join him for a quiet dinner, leaving the main house to the women and their excited preparations. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked as they sat brushing out Elizabeth's hair before bed, much as they might have at a girlhood slumber party. Elizabeth considered the question seriously. "Not about marrying Kieran," she said finally. "That feels like the most natural thing in the world, but about everything else. Being a good wife, maybe starting a family someday, living up to his expectations." Sarah smiled understandingly. "I think that's normal, but from what I've seen, you two bring out the best in each other. The rest will fall into place. When did you get so wise?" Elizabeth teased, grateful for her friend's reassurance. "I've been reading those romance novels you lent me," Sarah replied with a laugh. "Very educational." They giggled together, the sound girlish and carefree, before settling down to sleep or attempt to sleep in Elizabeth's case. She lay awake long after Sarah's breathing had deepened into slumber, watching moonlight pattern the floor through the curtains and thinking of Kieran, just a short ride away at the cabin, perhaps also lying awake thinking of her. Tomorrow, she thought as sleep finally began to claim her. Tomorrow, we begin our life together. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brilliance that seemed fitting for the occasion. Elizabeth was awake with the dawn, her excitement making it impossible to remain in bed. Sarah helped her dress for the ceremony, a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Holbrook had crafted with loving attention to every detail. It was simpler than what might have been fashionable in Boston, but perfect for a bride in Cimarron, New Mexico. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with small white flowers from her garden. "You look beautiful," William said, his voice thick with emotion when he saw his daughter fully dressed for her wedding. Absolutely radiant. Thank you, Father, Elizabeth replied, smoothing the skirt of her gown with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation. Is everything ready at the church? William nodded. Kieran is already there, looking as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. His attempt at the Western colloquialism made Elizabeth laugh, easing some of her own tension. The small church was filled to capacity when they arrived. It seemed everyone in Cimarron had turned out to witness the union of Elizabeth Jameson and Kieran Abernathy. Flowers adorned every available surface, their sweet scent filling the air as the music began. Mrs. Eaton at the piano, playing the traditional wedding march. Elizabeth took her father's arm, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Ready?" William asked softly. Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. The doors opened, and she saw Kieran waiting at the altar, his back straight, his expression a mixture of awe and joy as he caught his first glimpse of her. He was handsome in his new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him on her father's arm. Each step felt like both an ending and a beginning, the end of her life as Elizabeth Jameson, the beginning of her life as Elizabeth Abernathy. The end of solitude, the beginning of partnership. The culmination of a journey that had begun the night she was trapped in a burning barn and a brave cowboy had crashed through to save her. When she reached the altar, William placed her hand in Kieran's, a symbolic passing of responsibility that brought tears to all their eyes. "Take care of my greatest treasure," William said, his voice breaking slightly. "With my life," Kieran promised solemnly. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotions. Elizabeth was aware of the preacher's words, of the responses she and Kieran made, of the cool weight of the gold band as it slid onto her finger to rest beside her engagement ring. But mostly she was aware of Kieran, his steady presence beside her, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the love shining in his eyes as he pledged himself to her for all the days to come. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Kieran's hands were gentle as they cradled her face, his kiss tender and reverent, a promise of everything they would share from this day forward. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their community for the first time as a married couple, both beaming with happiness that seemed too great to be contained. The celebration that followed at the ranch was joyous and exuberant, a true Western affair with food and music and dancing that continued well into the evening. Elizabeth and Kieran moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone who had come to share in their happiness. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Kieran took Elizabeth's hand. "Are you ready for your wedding gift?" he asked, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Elizabeth nodded eagerly. "I've been curious since you returned from Santa Fe." Kieran led her away from the celebration toward the barn, where a small crowd had begun to gather at his earlier request. William stood at the front, his expression suggesting he knew what was coming. "Close your eyes," Kieran instructed when they reached the barn doors. Elizabeth complied, her heart beating faster with anticipation. She heard the doors open, heard Kieran step away briefly, then felt him take her hand once more. "You can look now," he said softly. Elizabeth opened her eyes and gasped. Standing before her was the most beautiful horse she had ever seen, a delicate Arabian mare with a coat like polished copper and intelligent eyes that regarded her curiously. "Kieran," she breathed, stepping forward slowly so as not to startle the animal. "She's magnificent." "Her name is Ember," Kieran said, watching Elizabeth's face with evident pleasure at her reaction. "I found her in Santa Fe, being mistreated by an owner who didn't appreciate her spirit. She reminded me of you, beautiful, strong, a bit of fire in her nature." Elizabeth reached out a hand which the mare nuzzled after a moment's consideration. "She's my wedding gift," she asked, hardly able to believe it. Kieran nodded. "Your father helped me arrange it. She's yours, Elizabeth. A proper ranch wife needs a horse worthy of her." Tears of joy spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks as she stroked Ember's sleek neck. "She's perfect. Thank you, Kieran. This is the most thoughtful gift I could imagine. Impulsively, she threw her arms around his neck, not caring that all their wedding guests were watching. Kieran caught her, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh through her tears. I love you, Elizabeth Abernathy, he said when he set her down, using her new name for the first time. And I love you, Kieran Abernathy, she replied, her heart so full it seemed it might burst from happiness. Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow. As they rejoined their guests, hand in hand, Elizabeth felt a sense of completion she had never known before. The journey that had brought her to this moment had not been easy, from the loss of her mother to the upheaval of moving west, from the terror of the barn fire to the uncertainty of opening her heart to love. But standing beside Kieran, surrounded by friends and family in this place that had become her home, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had been leading her here. To this man, this life, this future they would build together. The barn that had nearly taken her life had instead given her something infinitely precious, a love born in fire, tempered by time, and destined to burn brightly through all the years to come. Epilogue: 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter carried on the summer breeze, as Elizabeth sat on the porch of the cabin that had become a home filled with love and memories. She watched as Kieran chased their 3-year-old son, William, around the yard, the boy's giggles rising in pitch each time his father pretended to almost catch him. In her arms, their 6-month-old daughter, Catherine, gurgled happily, reaching pudgy hands toward her mother's face. Elizabeth pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, inhaling the sweet scent that never failed to fill her with overwhelming love. "Your papa and brother are silly, aren't they?" she murmured to the infant, who responded with a toothless smile that was the mirror of her father's. The years since their wedding had brought changes to the Jameson ranch, now officially known as the Abernathy Horse Farm. The breeding program Kieran and William had developed had gained a reputation throughout the territory for producing exceptional stock. Their horses were sought after by ranchers, the cavalry, and wealthy Easterners looking for quality animals. The success had allowed them to expand the property, adding more corrals and a larger stable. The cabin had been enlarged as well, with an additional room for the children and more space in the kitchen where Elizabeth often hosted gatherings for friends and neighbors. Ember, her wedding gift, had proved to be as spirited and loyal as Kieran had promised. The mare had given them 2 fine foals, both showing the same copper coat and proud bearing as their dam. Elizabeth still rode her whenever possible, though less frequently since Catherine's birth. William Jameson had built himself a smaller house on the property, close enough to be part of their daily lives but far enough to give the young family their privacy. He doted on his grandchildren and remained actively involved in the business, though he had gradually ceded more responsibility to Kieran and Elizabeth. "Mama, Mama, look," young William called, breaking free from his father's playful pursuit to run toward the porch. "I'm fast like Thunder." Thunder was the colt from Thunderbolt's last breeding season, now a yearling that the boy had claimed as his own from the moment it was born. "You certainly are," Elizabeth agreed, laughing as her son demonstrated his speed with another circuit of the yard. Kieran climbed the porch steps, slightly winded from the chase, but grinning with the easy joy that had become his natural expression over the years of their marriage. He settled beside Elizabeth on the wide bench, one arm going around her shoulders while the other hand gently stroked Catherine's downy head. "He's going to be a fine horseman," Kieran observed, watching their son now pretending to be a horse himself, complete with convincing neighs and prancing movements. "With you as his teacher, how could he be anything else?" Elizabeth replied, leaning into her husband's embrace. Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. "You seem thoughtful today. Everything all right?" Elizabeth smiled, touched as always by his attunement to her moods. "Just reflecting on how fortunate we are. If you hadn't been there that night, if you hadn't risked your life to save mine." "Hey now," Kieran said gently, turning her face toward his. "We agreed long ago not to dwell on what might have been. The fire brought us together, but it's the life we've built since then that matters." I know, Elizabeth acknowledged, and what a wonderful life it is. As if to emphasize her words, William came running back to the porch, breathless with excitement. Papa, the new foal is coming. Grandpa says to hurry. Kieran was on his feet immediately, his expression shifting to focused determination. Stay with your mother, son. I'll go help Grandpa. Elizabeth stood as well, adjusting Catherine on her hip. We'll all come. William is old enough to see a foal being born, and I want to be there too. Kieran looked like he might argue for a moment birthing could sometimes be difficult and unpredictable. But the resolution in Elizabeth's eyes was familiar enough to make him smile in surrender. All right then, Abernathy family to the rescue, he declared, scooping up their son and settling him on his shoulders. Let's go welcome the newest member of our herd. As they made their way toward the stable, Elizabeth felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This life they had created together, this family, this home, this love that had only grown stronger with each passing day was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined when she reluctantly followed her father west all those years ago. And it had all begun with a fire. With a barn ablaze in the night, with a cowboy brave enough to rush into danger to save a woman he'd never met. I love you, she said to Kieran as they reached the stable, the words simple but filled with the depth of everything they had shared and everything still to come. He turned, their son still perched on his shoulders, and the look in his eyes told her he understood all she wasn't saying. I love you too, Elizabeth, yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. With Catherine secure in her arms and William chattering excitedly from his father's shoulders, Elizabeth followed her husband into the stable where a new life was about to begin, one more blessing in a journey that had started with flames, but had led to the purest kind of happiness a heart could know.